Alrighty, tidy folks. Today we are still in Arizona, despite the intro. Ignore it, it's fine. Don't worry about it. We're good. It's fine. Today is repairing an old door in the shop that I was working in Arizona. So, funny story about this shop. Back in the day, around 2008 or so, I was working at Pep Boys. One of the guys I was working with decided he wanted to open his own automotive shop, and we began working together out of his garage at his home in just a residential neighborhood. We had to make sure we were, shut down by 2200 or so to avoid irritating the neighbors, as it were. We were doing everything with hand tools, no air. We didn't really have drip pans or anything like that. It was just, two guys in a garage getting some stuff done on the weekends when we were off of work. Eventually, it got to the point where he had enough business that we really needed a shop. So, we moved into this building in Sierra Vista, Arizona. This was somewhere around the middle of 2009, end of 2009. We were in this building for 3 or 4 years before we ended up moving to a larger building sort of out of town-ish. It's on the outskirts near the mall is where it was. That had the same number of bay doors, but the bay doors were larger and the shop interior was larger. Just after we moved out of this building that you see in the video, another guy moved in that knew the owner of the building. He's a friend of the owner, friend of the family kind of thing. A few months after he moved into this building, he brought us, Sal's Motorsports, the automotive shop, his 4Runner, and a replacement engine from Jasper Engine and Transmissions with, warranty and all that. It was fully rebuilt. He just needed us to pull the old engine out, put the replacement engine in so we could have, brand new engine. So we do that. And he didn't really have a whole lot of money. He had saved up for 5 or 6 months to be able to pay us to do this job, but he didn't have the money to do any of the rest of the stuff on the machine. That gentleman and I became friends over the next couple of years, and I found out a little bit later that he had moved into this building. I haven't spoken to the guy that I was working with on cars, the owner and proprietor of Sal's Motorsports, in a couple of years. I still talk to him from time to time, but I haven't talked to him in a couple of years at this point, since I left Las Vegas. But I am in fairly regular contact with the now proprietor of Twisted Metalz LLC in Sierra Vista, Arizona. This is the same guy that is the entire reason why I drove 20 hours from Utah, northern Utah, to southern Arizona to work on specifically his vehicles, primarily the work trucks, because, again, he owns this business, but his profits aren't huge, and we did do some comparisons with local shops as it pertains to pricing and labor hours and what have you. We even went to the dealership for some of the stuff, because sometimes it does happen that the dealership is actually a better cost or better value than a regular, Joe Schmo shop on the side of the road. So, I came down here, and the doors were still in the same sad shape that they were when we moved out of this shop. It has to have been 15 years ago now. And one day, I didn't have any parts, and I was bored, and it wasn't too crazy hot. So I decided, you know what? I'm going to make this middle door frickin' work. So I pulled it down and put it up and pulled it down and put it up, and I found out what the problems were, why it wasn't working correctly. The building next door, the same people, the same company, I guess, put the doors on the building next door, and I went over and talked to that guy, and he told me some of the problems that he had with his door. And I went and I looked at this one, and it was the same problem, where the axle ends, they were just cotter pins in a washer. So they would just rub through on the upper brackets that held the axles in place, and the end brackets would bend because of the pressure of the springs, and they would just come out of alignment, and etc., etc. It would just not work. What I found on this door was that the cotter pin had broken, the washer had come off this end that you see me on right now, and the wheel that the spring was attached to had come unwelded from the axle rod. So I had to weld that back in place. I should have disassembled the whole darn door and put it all back up there, but it's not those ones that you take and you stick the one tool into to spin the spring tension around easily. The way this wheel was designed it's an old school kind of design, and I didn't have the patience or the gumption to build or find the tool to reload the spring if I had unloaded it, so I just left the spring in place. What I was doing wasn't really at danger of damaging the spring or having it spring in my face, so it was fine for the most part. There was no, as far as I can tell, there was no danger. So I bent the bracket back in place. It's just a really thin piece of steel. Put a large piece of it's galvanized steel, washers for being used on fence posts outside, and stuck a really big beefy cotter pin in there. Hopefully it'll last a little bit longer, we'll find out. But then I was lifting it, and you see in the middle they use sheet metal screws to attach the door steel to the center wheel, which helps wrap the door material around the axle shaft as you roll it up and down. And the steel on the door had it ripped straight through where all the sheet metal screws had been screwed through it. This was a bit of a problem, because as the door would try to roll up, the one side would just flex outward from the wheel and collide with the door that it was trying to roll over, and then it wouldn't roll at all. That was very annoying, because then you had to fight with the door to try to get the roll up. So what I ended up doing was I took my very totally not flammable rag to hold the door in place, because me and gloves, we don't get along. And I used his Lincoln 180 HD, which I have the same welder here in Utah. My welder burns so much hotter. It would have burned straight through this door on the lowest voltage setting. But his I had on C, and it was working just fine. So just the difference in transformers between a couple of years makes you have to learn your machine. You really, really do. So what I did is I ended up just welding, patch welding, plug welding technically, where the sheet metal screws were across the rip, and then adding a couple of extra stitch welds across the ripped seam to hold it in place. I don't know how long it's going to last. The steel is now harder there and is more prone to snapping at that point than it previously was. Hopefully it'll last another 5 or 6 years, and even when it does start to tear again, he'll have another 2 or 3 before he has to even revisit it. But I made sure that the brackets on both sides, when I got done welding this rip in the middle, were intact, and they didn't have a whole lot of pressure on it. The spring's going to push the bracket out anyway, because the spring is attached to the bracket, and again, the bracket is fairly thin steel. But the tracks were okay, the wheels were okay, the steel of the door was okay. Nothing about this door was really exceptional. It wasn't exceptionally bad, it wasn't exceptionally good. It's fine. It's fine, it's fine. All in all, I think this job took a total of, I think I spent 2 hours on it, maybe. Most of that was trying to make sure I was standing on a piece of plywood supported by sawhorses, plastic sawhorses, mind you, really kind of cheap, shitty sawhorses. And it wasn't really all that great. And this video is still 20-something minutes long, even having sped up the footage quite a bit. So it wasn't a super short job, but it was one of those, I'm at the shop and this door is not working correctly. I'm waiting for parts. I don't know if they'll be here today or tomorrow, but if I go home, because it was 15 miles back home, so 15-20 minutes each direction. If I go home, I'm not coming back out for the day, so I might as well just do something around the shop. This was the thing that I found to do, and honestly, after this job, the door opens beautifully. It's not the best job. I'm not the best welder. I'm not the worst welder. I really don't like flux core, but this was just regular gas-shielded MIG with just your kind of off-the-shelf kind of welder. Nothing any too particular special or fancy. My own helmet, mask, whatever you want to call it, because I didn't want to be wearing somebody else's sweat. That's just weird. And you can see there I have to keep adjusting the wire speed because it never quite felt right to me. It was either too fast or it was too slow, or I couldn't get it quite dialed in. It felt like every single part that I was welding required something different, so I just had to compromise. You move slower, you move faster, you make it work, right? That, and I'm not a big fan of welding above my head anyway. It's just really annoying to me. Most people are not a fan of, if you can avoid it, don't weld over top of yourself. Hot sparkies down your pants are not very fun. Or in your armpit. Or in your ear. I've gotten them in my ear before. That's never fun. You hear stuff in your ear going snap, crackle, and pop, and you're like, oh, no, don't do that. It's really not good stuff. But we got them up there, and I did kind of wiggle it, jiggle it a little bit to make sure it wasn't going to just pop off. And it seemed okay. And when it rolled up, it was in the right position, because I just bent it straight back down to where it was supposed to be. There was a bit that I had to shave off because it was just too mangled to weld back down to roll nicely and evenly. So we lost a little bit of material there, but at the end of the day, it's fine. It's not a huge deal. And of course, yes, thank you, things. I wanted you to fall on the floor. Absolutely. Cool. Just so we understand each other. That's what I wanted you to do. Okay. After doing that, I then noticed his solution for the latch on the door was to put some really tiny nuts and bolts through the holes that also did not roll up with the door very nicely. So I ended up taking the bracket off-ish and running some slightly larger bolts and nuts through it, and then welding those to the latch so the latch didn't move on the door, because this thing was crazy loose. It was it was nuts. And you can see there we've got to just bend the lip in because it was bent out quite a bit. From every time you tried to roll the door up, it would collide and it would bend a little bit, and you'd futz with it up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, and finally it would go, but it was bent. Also, definitely OSHA approved stuff and things. The shop was full. All the ladders were gone. the door needed fixed. Sometimes you do what you gotta do. Luckily, none of this was professional. It's all private work, and OSHA can't really say anything to me on private property. So, yeah, exactly that. You see what I'm talking about? They used mixed metric and standard stuff, and it was cross-threaded. So I ended up having to cut the stuff off and find stuff that fit together to actually work. That was fun. And by fun, I mean not fun at all. And by interesting, I mean not fun at all. We got us some fancy-dancy washeroonies there. We're just gonna I ended up having to do it a couple of times because I'm smart and I didn't take the paint off. Don't worry about it, it's fine. Get enough heat on the thing and it burns the paint off. Just, don't breathe it in. Sometimes you do what you gotta do. If it's stupid and it works, it ain't stupid, right? Right? You guys know what I'm talking about. But first thing I did was tacked them on there and made sure everything still moved correctly. If I needed to, I could have just whacked it with a hammer and gotten it off. Also, enjoy this shot of the sun real quick. You're welcome. Then I just put washers on the other side. Welded them up, made sure everything was good and handy dandy. And I did find it strange that the latch on this doors did not have a mechanism on the inside of the door to move the latch back and forth. That was strange to me. Seems to me like you would primarily want the mechanism on the inside, not the outside. But this building was built as a storage facility, so you would be outside going in. It was like a storage unit, effectively, and these are the same kind of doors that I see on storage units all the time in southern Arizona. So it makes sense why they would be built like this. It seemed strange to me that they would not have put any kind of mechanism on the inside that you could open the latch with. Funnily enough, this was my first time using a tool of this type, that kind of vibrati multi-max, I don't remember what you call it, but this specific type of tool. And I don't mind it. Normally I'm not a big fan of changing the way I do things, but from time to time I find a new thing that does a thing better than the old thing. And I like that thing. Sometimes I find a thing that does a thing better than the old thing and I don't like it, and I stick with the old thing. But this was not one of those times. I actually quite enjoyed using that tool. Primarily because it doesn't throw big sparks around. which is very handy. It's usually used for tile and wood and crown moldings and what have you, but it works just fine for metal apparently, because it chopped off those little screws like nothing. And then once we get the latch all done, one final test. Put the door down, latch unlatch, latch unlatch. I did end up having to lube the latch. Just the little tiniest bit. As you can see there. Because actually attaching it back to the door, there was a little bit less clearance than it had had previously, so some things were not happy. But little tiny bit of lube, slides like the day it was, well, not brand new, maybe 5 years old. Slides like the day it turned 5 years old. But the door went up and down smoothly. Beat out a few extra little dents in the metal from people backing into it. And job was a good one. Bam-a-lam. As always, don't forget, if you like this video, to like it, subscribe it, crank it, and rip it. And we'll see you in the next one.